I think what Pine and I have been talking about a little bit has been really helpful in like thinking about this stuff, because in our day and age, people are much more likely to lean towards certain things because of technology. But what this is really pointing us towards is where people are at in the basics of their humanity. So where someone sits at the foundation of who they are and how they process information, how they take in information. So we try to conform ourselves to what we think we should be without asking ourselves what we actually are or how we process best. So when I was going through all this stuff in my Titus project a couple of years ago, I was learning a lot about who I was simply because of reading this stuff and learning it, because I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I do certain things or why I don't do certain things, and why I lean towards something one way or another way. And so I know for myself that I'm very much a visual learner and then very heavy kinesthetic and not very good auditory. So I know that for me, I barely ever listen to music, and I barely ever listen to podcasts, simply because I don't learn that way. And so when other people are like, oh, I'm listening to this amazing song or this awesome podcast by this teacher or this great teaching, I'm just like, great, that's awesome, but I don't learn that way, and it doesn't really help me. And so I don't have to feel bad simply because I'm not doing what everybody else is doing. Oftentimes we want to fit in with everybody else and conform to what everybody else is doing. But like I've said, on the first day and the second day, don't feel like you have to do what everybody else is doing. Find what works best for you and do it, which is very important for learning. We're not asking how smart somebody is, but how is somebody smart? Steven.
Is there a good online resource for figuring out whether you're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic? Because I don't think I've ever tested that.
I would suggest looking at the Learning Styles booklet, and you can read more detailed in each of these. I don't know if there is a specific test for it. I just went off of what I know of myself. So I know that when I want to learn something, I'm going to watch a YouTube video on it, and then I'm going to do it. And so that type of thing shows me that I'm more visual. And when I think of things, so one thing that's really common with visual learners and remembering things is they may not remember what something says in the Bible, but they remember where it is. They know where it's at on the page. And for me, I can remember where anything is in my Bible. I memorize things in my Bible not by verse references, but by where it's at on the page. I know exactly where that story is. I know where Jesus says this. I know where that verse is. I know where this chapter starts. I can picture all the chapter starts in the book of Acts in my mind, in my Bible, because of just remembering where they're at. And so I know that I'm a visual learner. And so if you read through that packet a little bit more, the booklet, you'll see things, oh, I'm very much like this, or much more like that. And so that's how I figured it out. Yeah. All right. So I hope I'm not boring you guys with any of this stuff. It's very helpful in understanding the people you're teaching as well as yourselves. So we're going to finish up with the right and left brain, and then we'll talk about multiple intelligences. So, struggles and difficulties for left and right brain people. Some struggles and difficulties for a left brain person is delegation. Sharing responsibility can be difficult. Trusting others can be a hard thing to do sometimes, which also falls under sharing responsibility. And artistic creativity, which me, Pine, and Abby were talking about. It can be much more difficult for left brain people to be creative and artistic, simply because they don't function that way. They don't think like that. It's just not who they are. Just like a right brain person tends not to be as logical. And so demanding that a right brain person process things logically isn't going to function the same way. It's like asking a left brain person to be artistic and to paint something. It just isn't there. And so it's harder to do.
So is it like going to change?
You can, yeah.
It's easy because I think I was only left. Now I don't think I'm left. Exactly. I'm kind of like I'm already so much right from each other. Like it is first time I feel like wow, I'm really not different.
Yeah. So basically what I'm doing is I'm showing you guys this. So this is left and this is right. I mean, this is a bad pendulum, but like this, what I'm showing you left is all the way over here, and right is all the way over here. And some people might be right here, and some people might be right here, where they have a little bit of both. But what I'm showing you is what's on the extremes, so you know where to find the middle. So I definitely have characteristics of both, and I think it'll be rare that you find someone who doesn't have both sides, because like I said, your brain's connected and you're going to share things between both. So things that, also another very struggle or difficulty for left brain is to make gut decisions, or agree with or follow people who make gut decisions. They want to know why something was chosen, why something was made, not just like off of feeling. They want a reason. Now people who are right brain, it can be difficult for them to follow a lecture or what someone is saying without having an outline or having an overview. So what's the big picture of what you're talking about? Where are you going with this? If that isn't given, it can be difficult for them to follow. It can be a struggle for them to be organized or asked to stay organized and to make rational decisions, or to finish things that were started. That can often be difficult. So a left and a right brain person store information differently. Okay? Now, this is a file cabinet or part of a library, the Dewey Decimal System of organization, and this is a closet that is messy. Left brain people are going to be much more like a file cabinet in how they store their information and retrieve their information. Whereas a right brain person is going to be much more like a closet in how they store and receive information, or store and retrieve information. So the left brain file cabinet stores information in detail and is very orderly and systematic in how they store information. And they retrieve it in the same detailed and orderly fashion. And it's often very easy for them to retrieve information. So in this sense, I am very, very left-brained. Like, this is probably where I stand out in being the most left-brained of all of these features. Because the Lord has like blessed me with an insane memory to remember the most random things. Like, I can remember huge things and little things and retrieve all sorts of information. And this is very much how I function. Now, a right brain person is going to store the big picture of things in a closet. So they will add to ideas based on previous knowledge and experience. So if they have a pile, like there may be a pile in a closet that is an idea, and they're just going to keep throwing things on that pile that agree with this pile. And they may not know how that pile started, but it's just there. This is an idea. Kind of, if you picture that in your mind. And they're going to retrieve information the same way. They're going to receive it in the big idea, but they're also going to have a lot of other things attached to that idea. So whereas a file cabinet, you can pull one file out. In a closet like this, you can't just pull one piece of clothing out. It's going to be attached to a lot of other things, and there's going to have a lot of ideas attached to it. And for them, it may take longer to retrieve information when asked questions, okay, because of this idea. So with a left brain person, if you ask them a question, you can almost expect an answer immediately. They'll answer you very quickly, and they might have other pieces of information in that file that piece of information came from. So they'll have things connected to it. Whereas a left or a right brain person is going to be more commonly just pulling out of information. It's going to be one big lump idea rather than just one specific thing, which one is not better than the other. Because a right brain person who pulls out information, you ask them a question, they're going to have a very big picture idea and a broad picture, where they will think of things because they're big picture that the left brain misses because they're very small in their thinking towards a question. A left brain person is going to see a question, they're going to answer that question. Whereas the right brain person may answer the question that's not even being asked. That is really the heart of what's there. So they're much more intuitive in that way.
I have been told or heard people say many times over the years I've been saved that God is the God of order, and if your life is disorganized, then you're not of God, and you need to learn organization.
Yeah.
Take classes, read books.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how many books I've read.
Not work.
Yeah. I think that idea comes very much from the Puritan teachings, and they're like seeing God as He created everything in order, and He didn't create anything that was like out of order, and there's no like randomness to it. But God knows the future, He knows what's coming, He knows what's past, all that kind of stuff is where that teaching comes from. But that idea also tries to conform every single person to one like idea. And I do think that God has created people individually and uniquely, and that right-brained thinking is not a result of the fall.
That's good.
I think right-brained thinking is not a result of the fall. I think that is it's a godly way of thinking and processing. We need each other, and people shouldn't be trying to conform, but be trying to grow. And that means right-brained people do and should work on being organized and effective and efficient in starting something and finishing something. And left-brained people need to work on being flexible and working in groups and trusting other people and relying on others, which is very hard for a left-brained person. Because for me, if I'm asked to do something, I know I can do it well. And I don't need anybody else's help because I know I can do it. But for the sake of other people, I will share and delegate and give something to somebody else, even though I know they won't do it as good as I will. And that's something I have to do, and trust people, which can be very hard and has been very hard in the past. So it's things like that where we all grow and work together. Now, I like this picture of the left and right brain better because although there is creativity and color on the right side, the left side is very orderly, organized. You see like chess pieces and architecture and things fitting together and running together very uniquely, where the right brain is very blended. So both sides, I think, function well together, and I like this one a lot. So let's talk about what left and right brain mean for teaching people. Now, when you teach a left brain person, you want to write keywords on the board, like this. You want to provide detailed instructions for assignments and state your objectives specifically. And you want to include individual activities, things people can do by themselves. For right brain people, you want to give them an overview of the lecture, or they might have trouble following. You want to have something written out where there are instructions so somebody can look back at them later. And you want to include activities and group discussions. So for example, on Friday I gave you a preaching assignment, and that was an individual assignment. And then yesterday, when I said we're going to be doing Bible overview presentations today, I offered, would you guys like to do it in a group or individually? And it was almost unanimous, let's do it individually. Because most of you guys who have been here consistently are left-brain thinkers who would rather work by yourselves without a group because you know you're going to do it a certain way. Whereas a right-brain thinker would like to do it in a group so they can process and play off each other. So if your lecture involves predominantly one side, you want to try to engage both sides of the brain in what you're saying, how you're processing, and working together with people. which is something that I am learning to do because, as you've seen and what you've just learned, my lectures are mostly left brain dominant.
Sorry, can you list out the left brain teaching things? I got keywords and individual activities, but I think I missed one.
Stating specific objectives.
State specific objectives. Thanks.
Yeah. So that doesn't mean you have to say like, these are my goals or these are my objectives, but you would say, this is what I'm hoping you learn, or this is what you should walk away with, or this is the direction I'm going in. So you don't have to use keywords like objectives or goals, but you want to point towards where you're going. All right, so multiple intelligences. Now, the predominant study of intelligence was the IQ test, which was based off of two types of intelligences, which was verbal, or sorry, it is, it's mathematics and language. So verbal, language and mathematics are what an IQ test bases a person's intelligence off of. But if somebody is smart in music, but maybe isn't smart in mathematics and language, they're going to score low on their IQ test. And so in the 1980s, a man by the name of Howard Gardner created a theory called multiple intelligence theory. And this theory is not based off of someone's intelligence in math and language. It is based off of somebody's ability to solve problems. So the multiple intelligence theory is based off of how does somebody solve a problem? What do they use to solve that problem? And that is what we will talk about today. So this theory sought to show people how is somebody smart? How do they solve problems? What kind of intelligences do they use to solve a problem? Because not everybody will use language and math to solve problems. Some problems cannot be solved with language and math. And because God has made each one of us unique, we cannot base every single person's intelligence off of language and mathematics. So let's talk about the 7 intelligences. The first one is verbal and linguistic. And this is language and communication, speech, text, and people who are auditory learners. This is demonstrated through someone's strength in language arts, like speaking and writing. And these students will all have been successful in traditional classrooms. Okay, so these are your straight A students in school, are often verbal and linguistic, because their intelligence tends to lean more towards what traditional teaching is in the West. So these are going to be the people who always knew the right answers and always had the best papers, that kind of stuff. Their skills are going to be things like listening, speaking, writing, storytelling. They're going to be great at explaining things. They're going to be very good at remembering information and using humor and vocabulary. Our next is logical and mathematical. This is the second of the 7 multiple intelligences. And they're reasoning and problem solving with numbers. So they're very good with numbers. And these are people who display an aptitude or an intelligence for solving problems with numbers. And they typically do well in a traditional classroom because they think logically and very sequentially. So these are common left brain thinkers. They think in order and they think very logically about things. They process information by what are the facts. And their skills are things like problem solving, classifying information, They work well with abstract concepts. People like your physicists and scientists, Bohr, Einstein, are people who worked well with the symbolic ideas, right? They worked well with letters that represented numbers and concepts. And so they were able to develop formulas in the area of physics and develop new ideas because they thought outside of the box. Things that will be helpful in, sorry, let me talk about the linguistic and verbal real quick. Things that will help them learn are using humor. They like listening to people who speak really well and have elegant speech. They enjoy reading and writing, and they have a really good memory for words and lyrics. So, for example, I myself am a linguistic and verbal, that's one of my major multiple intelligences, is verbal and linguistic. I can remember words and lyrics and memorize things and quote verses simply because of my ability to memorize and remember words and vocabulary. Ways in teaching logical and mathematical people is they love scientific theory and logic, and they love to solve problems. If they have a problem to solve, that will help them to learn. And they love to make connections between information. These people love brain puzzles and logic puzzles, games like chess, things that require strategy and reasoning. All right, number 3. Visual and spatial. These people visualize and organize things spatially. They like to organize things and see what you are talking about. So in this way, I exhibit some of these qualities where I love to organize things. And the best way for me to learn something is to touch it and put it in order. So for example, I'm staying in Andrew's house while he's gone, and his kitchen was not in the best order. And so over the weekend, I organized his kitchen. And now that his kitchen is organized, I know where everything is because of this learning style. Visual and spatial. Because I put everything back in its proper place, I now know where every single thing is. And that's helped me. So visual...
Will it be like that when they come back?
I hope so. I mean, they've enjoyed it when I've done it in the past for them, so... They like to see what you're talking about, and charts and maps like this, graphs, help them a lot. They love mazes and puzzles. They often daydream and imagine a lot. And they like to design things. One of the most telling skills that a visual and spatial person has is puzzles. They are very good at putting puzzles together. Me and my sisters are all very visual and spatial in this way, that we do puzzles very quickly. At the University of Washington, when I was a child, I have the record time of putting puzzles together.
Wow.
Because of just the ability to do it. And so a 1,000-piece puzzle, I could do it in 3 hours. And so just the idea, I can picture where everything goes. So when I have this type of, this is what, now I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you this is what this type of intelligence looks like. Okay, so I have a puzzle, and when I pull a single piece out, I know where that fits on the thing, and I can put it right on the square where it goes. And I'm going to build around every single piece that's laid on the board. And so this type of person knows where something goes and then can see where things go around it. Okay? So visual and spatial. Men are much more commonly visual and spatial than women, which is why there are more male architects than there are women architects. And why there's more men mechanics. Things that involve your hands and space, construction workers, much more commonly appeal to men because of this learning style. So yeah, the top, so each of these have like possible vocations or careers that appeal to these people, and the top 3 are architects, mechanics, and engineers for this one. So, and the people you commonly see dominating those fields are men. Okay, number 4. This is probably the most uncommon and the least recognized. Number 4 is musical. Song, rhythm, and musical expression. This is in the West, and I don't know anywhere in the world where this is commonly highlighted as a learning style. This often is viewed as something that is not very practical or very helpful, and they view this type of learning style is disregarded because it doesn't fit into common societal values. These people are going to learn very, very well with songs and with patterns. They love instruments and musical expression. And like I said, it's easy to overlook these students in traditional education. But this is also the least common of all of the multiple intelligences. They love to sing and hum musical tunes, and that helps them to remember things. They like to play musical instruments, and they have a very strong ear for music. So they can tell when something is out of key, or the tone is off, or when someone is singing poorly. They can always tell very quickly. Andreas, yeah. Andreas is very good at that, yeah. So it's not super common, but it does, you can tell when it comes up because someone will always say something about it. The skills of these people are often singing, whistling, playing musical instruments, and recognizing patterns. So they're very good at recognizing patterns. Number 4 is physical and kinesthetic. Yes. No. Oh, number 5. Yes, sorry, number 5. And like the kinesthetic learners that make up 15% of the dominant modalities, these people learn best with movement. When they can have activity and hands-on tasks. And these type of children are often labeled overly active because they learn best through their activity and they can't often sit still for very long. These type of learners have a hard time sitting still, but they love sports and gymnastics. And they often process things through body sensations, and they have gut feelings very commonly. Something you'll notice is this type of learner will often touch people when they're talking to them. So whether on the shoulder or some kind of physical contact, they like to have physical contact when they're talking with somebody, or they like to be much closer than usual. Their skills are often sports, hands-on, crafts, and things like that. Someone who is very much this way is Eric Sternholm. Eric Sternholm is probably the most kinesthetic learner that I've ever met. He is very hands-on. He loves doing physical activities. He is always doing sports, outdoor stuff. Things that help him do hands-on help him learn immensely. So it isn't as common as, say, other ones, simply because our society and traditional education has been geared more towards certain learning styles. number 6, interpersonal. Now, the next two, interpersonal and intrapersonal, are group-oriented and individual-oriented. Now, this is one of the 7 learning styles, but people will often exhibit one of the group or individual-oriented. Just because you may not have this one as a dominant doesn't mean that it doesn't function in your life, okay? So there are 7 of these multiple intelligences, but you are not restricted to one of them. You will exhibit all sorts of different ways that you problem solve. This just helps people to find where is a dominant problem solving in my life and how do I do that. So these are people who are noticeably people-oriented. They're often called social butterflies. They love to be around people. They love to be around many people. And students like this are often labeled too talkative or too concerned about being social. This is something that I used to be a lot, but because of traditional education, it's squashed in my life. So, because I would talk a lot, and I would process with people a lot, and I love being in groups, and because that doesn't fit with traditional education, this was pushed down in me, and I am not as much like this as I used to be. So, this is something to watch out for in people, but these people learn well with talking with people, maintaining peace and mediating conflict. These people have tons of friends. And they socialize a lot. They also have a lot of common sense or street smarts. And street smarts is another way for like common sense. You just, have common sense. I don't know how to explain street smarts super well. I'm just using a synonym. It's like an idiom kind of.
It's like a knowledge of the way things work in a very practical, everyday sort of.
Street smarts,
I don't know.
The best context I could give you is somebody who lives in New York and knows how to go about life without being a nuisance to other people. So like my sisters, one of my sisters who is very, very smart, she was the #1 national debater in college in the country. She has no common sense. She'll just like go out to the worst part of the city at midnight and not think anything of it. Simply because she doesn't think of that kind of stuff. Street smarts is knowing that you don't go to the worst part of the city at midnight. So it's those kind of things that's like the most extreme example, but it's things like if you see somebody who looks like they're drunk, you don't go up to them and like ask them for help in some way. Like you go up and help them, right? Mm-hmm. So like, or you avoid them. If there's a conflict, your street smart tells you, okay, I'm not going to get involved so that I don't get hurt. But you could also look at that as selfish things, and you want to act Christ-like, and so you think about the situation. But street smarts is like common sense type stuff, in my opinion. All right. So the next one, number 7, is intrapersonal. And these people are good at understanding oneself. They're especially in touch with their own feelings, their own values, and their own ideas. And they may tend to be more reserved, but they're actually quite intuitive. These people prefer to work alone. They have a certain quality of inner wisdom and intuitive ability. And they seem to love their own private interests, what they do by themselves, and they are very concerned about their own private deal. Often these people will march to their own beat. So they don't care what other people think. They're going to dress how they want. They're going to have an attitude how they want. They'll behave how they want. They're very individual. They're very good at recognizing their own strengths and weaknesses and reflecting and analyzing themselves so they can improve. So those are our 7 multiple intelligences. And the school systems of today are generally more geared towards linguistic and mathematical. And so it is our job to incorporate and recognize these other learning styles so that we don't look at how smart somebody is, but how is somebody smart? How do they solve problems? What do they learn and what do they how do they process? So we want to resist the temptation of categorizing ourselves because we learn in many different ways here. For me, my dominant ones are linguistic and spatial, and some kinesthetic as well, but those are the ones that I am dominant in. So when you teach students, they're going to come from secondary education with a lot of baggage because of the way it is oriented and geared. So if someone is more commonly a kinesthetic learner, they're going to come from a place where they have been taught linguistically and mathematically pretty much their entire life, if being raised in America or Western style education. But we have to remember that we are different in each of our own ways and that we are unique in our learning styles. So, I think that's the last one. Yep. So let me talk real quick about oral learners. So I've mentioned a little bit over the past couple of days about oral learners and how oral learners are at the base of every society. And oral learners learn through hearing story and processing story and seeing visually. The whole biblical story was an oral tradition. And oftentimes we do not give oral cultures enough credit. Because oral cultures don't write things down. They just remember things. And they pass on information through story. And so there are plenty of stories of missionaries coming across a tribe in a random country in the hills that have never seen foreigners. And this tribe has history that dates hundreds of years. But they remember it and pass it on by telling stories at night between each other. And that's probably how the book of Genesis was remembered and written, was by oral tradition. So when Moses is writing the book of Genesis, it probably comes from oral tradition that the Israelites taught each other and shared with each other when they were in slavery in Egypt. And so this oral tradition goes all the way back to the earliest of cultures, but because of the printing press, we have lost a value for oral culture and oral tradition. So in the West, we rely very heavily on what we read and the pictures that we see, instead of painting pictures in our minds. But oral cultures are still a majority of the earth today. Africa's huge oral culture, South America, a lot of the Asian continent is very oral. And something that I believe I've shared, but in Nagaland, when I was teaching the Bible overview in 2014, I got up and taught the Bible overview like I taught it to you yesterday, and everybody just was blank stares at me the whole time. Just so bored. And I could not figure out why. But I had done this Bible overview, and I thought, this is going to be awesome, everybody's going to love it. But it just went downhill very quickly. And I had to think about, okay, what do I need to do differently? How do I engage my audience? And so like I shared earlier, I started to compose skits for each of the points of Bible overview. And so for Bible overview, I had 9 or 10 skits to involve in the entire thing so that people would get involved. And when I started doing skits, everybody started laughing, interacting, connecting, and it became much more of an intimate and family environment. And that's what oral cultures often do, is when they tell stories, there becomes much more interaction and involvement with the people. And so at one point, we taught the book of Esther, and from beginning to end, we acted out the entire book of Esther. And it incorporated the entire audience, and they absolutely loved it, because they got to interact with and be a part of the story. And so as you think about oral cultures and you think about people, we want to think that everybody is going to interact with the things that the stories we're telling and the things we're acting out. That people are going to see them and become a part of them. In DBS, that is why I did skits, or had skits done, is people saw something played out before them. It involved auditory, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, and seeing movement, being part of a movement, that kind of thing. And so, when we think of oral learners, we need to consider the fact that their history, their lives are a lot based off of story. And that as we tell story, we are connecting with often the deepest parts of people's learning capabilities. And so involving and incorporating stories into people and into their lives will become a foundation in who they are. I can think back, it's not super far for me as it is for others, but thinking back 20 years to stories that I heard when I was 5 years old from my grandfather or from my parents. Formative stories of growing up and thinking about things that happened in my life. And it's those stories that impact me and affect me to this day. And it's stories from the Gospels and from the Old Testament that affected the lives of believers for centuries. And it's those stories that have such a deep impact that it's why Jesus tended to incorporate stories into everything that he did, or everything he told, visuals. It's very rare that Jesus just gave a principle or a concept and expected people to follow it without giving some kind of story or visual interaction. When Jesus talks about the kingdom, every time he gives some kind of story. The man with the pearl, the fisherman with the nets, the treasure in the field, the woman with the coins. And me saying those simple references brings the story back to your mind. You can think of the story and how it plays out. Because stories connect with the deepest part of our learning. And so, Jesus incorporates those stories into everything he teaches. And being that he is one of the best teachers, if not the best teacher, to ever walk the earth, we can learn a lot from his teaching style. Most of what he taught was through story. Now, that takes me into what I want to finish up with this morning, and that is application. Now, I mentioned Hebrews, I think last Thursday. Hebrews is the book with the least amount of application in the entire Bible, or in the entire New Testament. It's full of theology. But that is not the common case in New Testament books. In fact, Paul's writings are pretty split 50-50. Where as you read Paul, you're going to have about 50% theology and 50% application. Most of his books, he talks for a couple chapters about theology and what we believe, and then he talks about how we respond to what we believe. But you actually find it interesting that a majority of Jesus' teachings are 70% application and only 30% principle and theology. But most of what Jesus teaches is what we should do in response to what we should know. And so that application is super vital in what we bring. And I could get up here, and the great thing about stories is that when you tell a story, you don't have to give somebody a specific application because you're illustrating an application already. So you're showing people what they should do instead of telling people what they have to do. And that has often been the best way for people to learn how to live their lives. That there's a saying of rabbis and their disciples in the first century, and that is that a disciple should be covered in the dust of their rabbi. which means that they should be walking so close behind their rabbi and looking and being so near to him that they're being covered by what is behind him. And the idea was that they imitate everything he does. They follow him so near so they can become just like him, because he was their teacher. The idea is to emulate, imitate, become like their teacher. So when Paul is saying, imitate me, he's living a life that is worthy of imitation. And Jesus' disciples follow his life and imitate him. And so our applications can come fantastically through story. And that's what Jesus often does, is tell his applications and give his applications through story and through his own life. An application, as I've harped on a few times, is going to be one of the most important things we bring to our teaching, because it is what is going to bring the change. It is the so what to our entire teaching. So if you just tell people a bunch of information, there isn't a so what. So they're going to be asking the question, well, what do you want me to do with that now? You told me all that stuff, so what? Why does any of that matter? Because what we're looking for in people is that they would change. And as we share with them, and as we teach them, we want to pray that the Lord would bring change into their lives, that he would be the one that would shift their hearts. Because the Holy Spirit, we know, is the one who brings the change in our lives. But as teachers, it's not our job to change people, but it is our job to create an avenue for people to be changed, to show them the path to walk. And it is the Holy Spirit, the guide, who will lead them down that path of change and that path of application. But we want to be those who clear the path for people so they know the one to walk. So I told you a story about a man who was on his deathbed with cancer last week, very briefly. And I'm going to tell you the whole story today. So there once was this young boy who loved to watch his father race bicycles. And his father was an amazing racer, and he would participate in every race that he possibly could. He would travel to different nations to participate in all sorts of races, and he would always bring his son with him. And his son would be there at the finish line cheering him on as he crossed the finish line. And for this child's 5th birthday, his father bought him a bicycle. And he invited all his friends over to come and see the bicycle because he was so excited about the gift his father had given him for Christmas. And as he continued to grow older, his fascination with bicycles only increased. He loved to look at them. He always loved the colors of the different bicycles, the way they looked, different ones that people rode. He was always fascinated with them. When his friends bought new bicycles, he would go and see them and have them talk about their bicycle and how much they loved it. And he just fell in love with bicycles. His father would buy him another bicycle every few years, a brand new one. And as he continued to grow older, his fascination with bicycles increased. And he fell even more in love with bicycles. In high school, he began to design his own bicycles, his own concepts. And after he graduated from high school, he opened his own bicycle shop, which was a repair shop. He would come and he would work on their bicycles, taking them apart, putting them back together. And as he got older, his designs began to get picked up. And people started to design, or started to imitate and make the bicycles that he was designing. He became very famous for the designs that he was producing. And as he continued to go to races, as he was growing up and watched people race bicycles, he began to see his bicycles in the races, the ones that he had designed. And he had a son. And his son also loved bicycles. And he loved to collect bicycles, and he loved spending time in his dad's shop with all of the bicycles. Well, as they both got older, they would both go to races together, and they fell more in love with bicycles, and his father continued to design bicycles because it was his passion. And then one day, his father went to the doctor because of how he'd been feeling. Had some tests run and was diagnosed with cancer. And as he was admitted into the hospital, his son came to visit him. And when his son came to visit his father in the hospital, he walked over to his bed and he said to him, "Dad, if there is one thing that you would change in your life, what would it be?" And his father looked at his son and said, "I would have learned how to ride a bicycle." Because you see, even though he was fascinated with bicycles, learned about them, studied them, created them, watched them, he never learned to ride them. Even when his father had bought him a bicycle at 5 years old, he only invited his friends over to look at it. He never rode it himself. And if we do not take the Word of God and apply it in our lives, we are fooling ourselves. We are like this man who studied about bicycles, created bicycles, learned about them, taught others about them, but never rode it himself. And if we think that we can get through life by only studying, understanding, and thinking about the Word and telling others about it and not applying it, we have missed the point of the Word. We have missed the point of what Christ has called us to. And so we must call people to apply the Word into their lives. And we must stand as an example. And so as we apply the Word into our lives, we must think about the things that have changed our life as we tell others. As we bring application to other people, we should think about the things that have first changed us. YWAM lives by this. Value number 12 is to do first, then teach. We want to have applied something into our life first before we go about telling other people how to do it. We want to be able to set ourselves as an example. And we need to consider our audience when we think about the application that we make and the application that we're calling them into. And when you call your audience into applying something, that isn't just your audience. You also want to be applying things into your own life. Because an application isn't just an application for the people you're speaking to, but an application is something that is supposed to change your own life as well. How are you taking the truth of the Word and incorporating it into your own life? So my hope is that you guys would take the things that you've learned over the past couple of days and apply them into what you are teaching, into the people that you're with, the audience you're teaching, whether you are teaching a Bible study of 4 people or an audience of 40 people. That the things you've learned about preparing and presenting, about the Bible overview, and about how people learn would affect your teaching and applying this into what you're sharing and how you share it with others. So let me pray for us, and we'll be finished. Thank you, Lord, so much for creating each one of us unique, and that you have taught each and every one of us your Spirit and your presence, God, and knowing you. Jesus, we draw near to you every single day, God, that we would continue to be people who hunger after your presence, who hunger to know you more, to understand you more, God, and that we would be hungry to effectively communicate who you are and effectively share with others, God. Would we apply your teachings into our own lives, God, that we would be people who would live out your word. We would be those who apply it into our lives, God, that we would never think that knowing it is enough, but doing it is our goal. Lord, we love you so much. Thank you for setting such a good example for us, Jesus. And that when we look to you, Jesus, we are so encouraged in our lives, God, and challenged. And Jesus, would we always be challenged. Thank you so much, Father, for yeah, everything that you brought this week and these past couple days, and yeah, would you bless our time together? In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
The lost sheep have appeared.
Yes.
Give us hugs.